Hi, good morning, everybody. Happy Monday, and welcome back to our next episode, our next conversation on ending violence against women. We have with us a man this time, and I am very excited to have this conversation with him. Uh, Kevin, welcome. A warm welcome to you.
Thank you very
And
much, and thank you for including me in your journey as well.
thank you. And I'd like to say a little bit about Kevin. Kevin empowers individuals to embrace change and move confidently ahead despite challenges and critics. As someone who has mastered the art of resilience and hope, Kevin inspires men and women alike as an author, change management specialist, speaker, and visionary. Kevin has risen to the top and also faced challenges that changed the trajectory of his life and career. He is now dedicated to helping individuals flourish as they navigate through changing and often turbulent times. His signature message, The Change Revolution, provides a blueprint for those navigating through change, desiring to achieve great results. That's awesome. So, change is the hardest thing to work with. Change is the hardest thing to work with for anybody. Even now, with things changing during COVID times, it's so difficult to not be in an environment that has been familiar to us for a long, 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 long time. So that's why people are so confused and people don't know what to do and what not to do. Today, we're talking about how we can bring about a positive and healthy change in the relationship between a man and a woman. Um, Ideally, we are supposed to work together, collaborate, and coexist in love, peace, and harmony. However, a couple of years ago, I was doing courses in Landmark. And one of the seminars that I attended was called Listening Men and Listening Women. And at first, I didn't understand what that what that title meant, listening men and listening women. And I was a bit confused about what it could mean. And I was in a room full of men and women, and we were having conversations where the you know there was someone moderating the conversation in a way that people were asked to for listen for certain things. So when that conversation came up, what I gathered from the interactions of men and women were that both of them are listening for setbacks, listening for what's not working, listening for mistrust, listening for discord, disharmony, and listening for apprehension and fear. Both men and women have a lot of apprehension and fear in them, and that's what they're listening for, and that's why the relationship that they create and build is based on what they're listening for. That's what my experience was. And so, as a woman who has been hurt by men and lived a life listening for mistrust and apprehension and fear, I am offering this space for a dialogue coming from an intention of wanting to build a relationship of mutual respect and trust for each other. And as a man sitting on a platform where we are discussing ways to end violence against women, I ask you, who could you be so that you inspire another man to show up in love and compassion for all the women in his life? And that is my intention for this episode. Now, based on the 16 days of activism and supporting that, we're talking about ending violence against women, and I want to get to understand what role could a man play in ending violence against women? What is your perspective of it?
That was an incredible opening, and there's so many valuable things that you mentioned. And before even answering that question of how can a man, woman end anything, this morning I was listening to an interview Oprah had with Maya Angelou a number of years ago.
Right,
And one of the things that Maya said in that interview really struck with me is that you can't change anybody.
right,
All you can do is create a safe space for individuals to be part of.
right,
And whether the individuals in that space choose to change or not, to change their view, to change their feelings, to change their mind, that's so beyond your control.
right.
And a big part of it has been my own journey and my own story. And it's one that's really led me to this moment in time where I think back over my 40 some odd years on this earth. And, in addition to being bullied as a child and having a stutter, losing my parents at a young age, um,
Hmm.
being diagnosed with cancer, going through bankruptcy, head brain trauma. Almost 12 years ago, I was accused of sexually assaulting someone who worked with me. And the fascinating thing for me is that probably was the greatest moment in my life, which I finally paid attention to and started following what the universe was trying to tell me. And I'm a big proponent that the universe is always guiding us. It's guiding
Right,
us in whatever path it wants us to be on. And if we're not following that path, the universe is going to nudge us. If we don't pay
right,
attention to the universe, those nudges become punches, they become kicks, they become sledgehammers over the head. And one of the things that really happened out of that story of being accused is while I was never convicted, I was very much publicly shamed. And that process, that journey, in essence, I was a Me Too before the Me Too movement even started, is it forced me into myself. It forced me into understanding more about myself. And I learned along that journey that the only way to change the world is to change yourself. And this
right,
is that element that you talked about, that landmark session,
right.
listening men, listening women, and I firmly believe that majority of individuals in our culture today listen to respond. We don't listen to understand. And most of what people say, it's their own dream. Don Miguel Ruiz, Four Agreements, would talk about everyone's just living in a dream, everyone's living in a fog. And the words that people communicate really are just the tip of the iceberg. And I
Right,
love listening for what's not being said, because what's not being said is usually where the connection will rest and where true healing lasts. And there's
right.
a researcher, an Asian researcher, a number of decades ago. He really coined that theory of asking a question 3 times. And if you ask
Mm,
the question 3 times, the answer is going to get different. And the answer is going to get
right,
a little deeper. And the answer is going to come to the truth. Because all I see in our culture right now are individuals yelling at each other what they want the other side to hear, to see, to learn. But we're not doing any of the work on the inside.
right,
And so, to answer that question, how do we communicate, talk to men about ending violence with women? Well, I would take that question a little bit deeper. How do
right.
we end violence?
Period.
Whether it's, period, whether it's against men, whether it's against women, whether it's against children, whether it's against animals, whether it's against inanimate objects, how how do we get to that point? How do we go deeper? How do we find out what our real drive as human beings are? And where did this
Right.
separation come from in the first place? But this isn't what we're taught in schools. This is not what we're taught in social media. This is not what we're taught in our culture. And in fact, what actually happens, we are ingrained from a very young age to suppress our anxiety, to suppress our fear, to suppress our anger. But all that ends up happening is the more we suppress it, the more that it's going to keep coming up and keep bubbling up. Because the concept of ending violence against women, it's not new. It's not new in 2020. It's not new in 2019. It
Right.
has been existing for hundreds and thousands of years. So if it's been existing for thousands of years, well, maybe we just need to change the question. Because the question we've been asking for 1,000 years isn't actually doing anything.
Mm-hmm.
And you get to a point where whatever you resist
Persist.
persists. And I do believe that we are put on this earth to learn a lesson. And until we learn that lesson, we're going to keep repeating the same mistakes over and over and over again. And I can't help but even think about, our times with COVID. We've all been here before. We humans are a funny species that we seem to forget that everything just goes in cycles, everything that needs to go around and around and around. But until we
Mm-hmm.
end that cycle, we're never going to get to a change. So for my journey, I've done a lot of work on myself. And I remember 10 years ago, I used to be that person who'd be preaching from the rooftops, demanding change. And we can't always believe what we read in the media. We can't always believe what we read in the paper. We can't, right? That was my narrative. But then I realized that that wasn't doing any good. It wasn't doing me any good. It wasn't doing my neighbor any good. And so I
Right.
started to be quiet. I started to ask those deeper questions. And I've been fortunate. I've been fortunate for the last 2 years to be studying directly under Eckhart Tolle, who I consider to be one of the greatest
Wow.
spiritual
Yes.
teachers of our time. And I've chosen to accept peace and I've chosen to accept joy because those
Mm-hmm.
are the only things that really allow me to live in harmony with my fellow beings.
Right.
And I can't help but think about, you talked about change. Change is the hardest thing that people face. Uh, I don't necessarily believe the actual physical act of change is difficult. It's the
Mm-hmm.
narrative before change because no one wants to leave what is familiar to them. And you mentioned that familiarity.
Right.
But all we have to do in our culture, we're blessed with, 4 seasons: spring, winter, summer, fall. All we have to do is pay attention to the tree. Does the tree assault, abuse, emotionally abuse another human? No. Another tree? No. And where do people learn to abuse, bully? It's ingrained from the time that they're small children. And
Right.
all abuse is an imbalance of power. And one could
Right.
say that our political leaders today are abusing us with what they're putting into place. You could look around the world. We're 7.3 billion people on this massive rock that's been around for billions and billions of years, hurtling through space. It's always been the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a movie, I think it's Velvet Underground, and there's a quote in the movie where one person says, I set out to change the world, and all I ended up doing was changing myself.
Mm-hmm.
And the other person says, well, what's wrong with that? To which the person replies, well, nothing, as long as you don't look at the world. And that quote always sticks with me because
Mm-hmm.
Is our time and our energy valuable yelling at each other, trying to make
Mhm.
other people change? Or is our
Right,
time more valuable changing ourselves?
right,
And so that's a really long answer to your question of what can we do? Well, what can we
right.
do?
So,
We could completely recreate the education system. We could actually teach kids things that are valuable, like self discovery and meditation and mindfulness. And maybe in 3 generations, we might see a change. Maybe. But we
mhm,
then need 7.2 billion people to buy into that.
right, right. I hear you, and yes, um, the best way to cause a change is to bring that change within yourself. You cannot change someone else. What you said is very true. You cannot change someone else. What you can do is change yourself. And if each one of us did that, then we could see the results across the globe. And that's a very big um, you know plan idea. It's not something doable perhaps overnight. Now, when we had that conversation about listening men and listening women, um, I was on justifying why, as a woman, I am I have that kind of listening because I was not born with that kind of listening. My dad is the most loving, caring, giving man in the world for me. The first love that I had towards a man was my dad, and he's a great role model, great example. So I grew up with the idea that men are loving and men are protective and men are caring and men spoil you, in love. That was my idea of a man. And when I and then I have a brother, and my brother is about 10 years younger than me, so he's more of my weakness. Like, I'll indulge and he gets away with a lot of stuff. So that has been, yes, that has been the beginning of my relationship with men. And from there, when I walked into a man's life where I became his wife, my the whole experience of being with a man changed. And I was anticipating and expecting, or even taking for granted, that he's going to be something that my dad was, and he's going to be loving, he's going to be caring, I'm safe. And so obviously I had all my guards down with him. He's my husband. But then, and I'm not saying this to complain or to continue focusing on the bad things, but what I'm trying to share is how I shifted, like coming from a place of being loving and respecting of men, how I shifted. And so when I got married and I was lied to, like lies after lies, because of the addiction that he was dealing with, lies after lies. And then eventually towards the end it was physical violence. And it hurt. It hurt, and I was not the same anymore. And that's when all the fears, all the doubts came in. And then the same person that I loved so dearly, that I was engaged to when I was 18, that I knew when I was 15. I knew him when I was 15. I got engaged to him at 18. I had his daughter when I was 22. I mean, I married him at 22, had my daughter at 23. I wanted to love him. I wanted to trust him for the rest of my life and have a great relationship with him. So when this happened, I so my dad was an exception, and the rest of the men are bad, is what I made it mean for myself. That my dad is an exception. My brother is silly. He'll never grow up. So he can't harm anybody. He'll never grow up. But now the rest of the world of men cannot be trusted. What would you have to tell me as a man so that um, I feel safe. I change that narrative. I can find myself again. I can find myself loving and trusting a man again.
Uh, it's interesting because what I found fascinating how you described your father, your brother, and then your relationships. One of the things that I learned that really changed my life from Eckhart,
Right,
and this is a phrase that very few people accept.
right,
And before I say the phrase, when I meet people today for the first time, or I hear
right.
their story, or it's people that I've known, and they come to me and they tell me that, they lost their job, they're getting divorced, they're bankrupt, they're diagnosed with cancer, right? The worst things on life that are happening to them. Inside, my instant reaction is, I am so freaking happy for you because I cannot wait to see what newness is going to get birthed out of this disaster. And
Right.
that's the principle of change, right? Is we prepare for change, we go through suffering, we learn to accept joy out of suffering, and then we mature and serve. And if we
Right.
do not learn to find the joy out of suffering, we will never escape suffering. We will just
Hmm.
keep going back in that cycle. And then once you've accepted joy in suffering, how do you go on and mature and serve? Because if you've gone to the gutters of life, what is the point of going there if you're not going to help other people? And now I think
Hmm.
you and I met a couple years ago. I first heard your story. You've heard my story on a stage in Toronto. And ever since first meeting you, I've been watching your growth and development. And it's been so fascinating because it's almost like, you're continually staying curious, you're continuing asking the
Yes.
questions, you're digging deeper, and you're going to the places that hurt inside, and you're sitting with your pain, and you're sitting with your brokenness, and you're sitting with your darkness. And very
Right.
few people actually do that, but it's in
Hmm.
those moments where we gain the most insight about why we're here in the first place. So Eckhart said, act as if you chose this moment.
Okay.
That is very difficult for
Mm.
a human to wrap their head around.
Right.
What is it about this situation that I need to learn? What
Hmm.
is it about this moment that I still need to learn? And through the at least the last 12 years of self discovery, I have been able to take a personal inventory of every single thing that has ever happened in my life and break it down to a common element.
Hmm.
Everything. And then I really made that conscious shift in myself to say, well, it wasn't that person who did X, Y, or Z to me. It was me who
Mm.
invited that tragedy into my life. Because out of that tragedy, I needed to learn this. And it's even personal relationships.
Right.
Until I accepted that I was inviting negative people into my life, did I then start to find positive people?
Hmm.
And so it's interesting. And your story about your dad, it painted that picture as for you as a young girl, that it painted the picture that all men are perfect. So then you go on
Yes.
this journey, and then but you learn that not all men are perfect, and how
Right.
difficult it must be. I have actually another story, and I'll flip to it because it's the same example. There's someone I know. Her father was diagnosed with cancer.
Right.
And all of her friends, all of her family, all of her holistic healthcare people she knew all said, your dad is going to be fine. He's going to beat this, blah, 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 blah. So in her mind, she painted the narrative. She painted the story that her dad, her hero, was going to beat cancer. But then he died. And she has never been the same because she created a false narrative that everything was going to be okay. But one of the
Mm-hmm.
difficult things in this world that I had to learn, because
Mm.
I came from very loving parents, and
Right.
I've learned it and I've imparted it on my son, who's now 13, that you don't always get what you want. Life is very difficult. There are
Right.
bad people on earth, and sometimes bad shit is going to happen to you. But it's how do you
Mm-hmm.
respond to that? How do you move forward? And so, again, is my role is not to say, you know, there are good men out there. My role is to say there are good people, there are bad people. There is light, there is darkness. There is
Mm-hmm.
yin, there is yang. And
Mm-hmm.
I've had a lot of time in the last number of years where I've been really fortunate to study every single major religion and spiritual text we have in our culture. And they're all the same. None of them say everyone's perfect. None of them
Right.
say everyone is going to treat you well. In fact,
Mm-hmm.
they all say you need to be prepared for those who try to kill you, for those who try to take you down. And
Right.
they all teach you to be compassionate to those people. Because,
Right.
your first husband, I don't know what he experienced growing up. I don't
Right.
know where, his violent path came from. I don't know where that started.
Right.
And I've said this, um, well, every time there's a mass shooting, including, I think, the person, the person who drove the van in Toronto a few
Yes.
years ago. He's now in
Mm-hmm.
court, or it was in court. And I remember when that happened, and I was leading a Mo Mondays, a motivational speaking series that night, and I took
Right.
the stage. And I
Right.
remember in my opening monologue, I said, how can we be compassionate for the people who lost their life as well as the person who drove the van? That's a
Mm-hmm.
very powerful place to get to in life.
Right.
Because if you can have compassion, empathy for the people who are causing pain, anger, suffering, grief, loss of life, that is how you change the world. And you sent me a message this morning and you included Mother Teresa's quote.
Right.
Mother Teresa is a perfect example where she was hurting as a child. She had her own trauma, she had her own
Right.
pain, and she
Right.
went out to try and help others.
Mm-hmm.
But yet, when she passed away, her final journal entries, she spoke about she never found Jesus. And she was sorrowful for never being able to do that. And I think one of the holiest people on earth, that was her biggest regret, is that she never found Jesus. She went on this journey.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's easy in our culture to say all men are bad. Or it's easy if you're a man and your ex-wife cheated on you, it's easy to fall into that. It's not easy to rise above. And every single person we ever meet is our teacher. Everyone is here to either teach us about ourselves or
Mm-hmm.
teach us about others. And we make the conscious choice as to whether we're going to vibrate up into love, joy, peace, enlightenment, or if we're going to vibrate down into shame, fear, anger, deceit, regret. Because at the end of the day, everything is energy.
Right.
And so
Right.
the fascinating thing about your journey is you had the first experience with your father.
Right.
You knew that was possible. You went on a journey where you know, vibrated down in your energy. But then you
Right.
started asking those questions about, well, this can't be all there is. There has to be more for me. There has to be a greater purpose. And as you went on that journey, you then start connecting and meeting. And we're connected to a lot of people in the social world. And there are
Right.
some amazing, powerful, loving, compassionate, driven men in
Right.
our mutual circle.
Right.
And anytime that I'm having a down day, I will look towards those people. And there's a lot
Right.
of people that inspire me that I've never met.
Right.
And that is what I would encourage, in this conversation, regardless of whatever the conversation is, instead of yelling, instead of standing on your side of the canyon, now this isn't, it's not, I'm saying for you, I'm saying for culture, instead
General.
of standing on your side of the canyon and yelling at the other side of the canyon, well, build a bridge.
Right.
And not only meet halfway, but go to the other side of the canyon and see
Right.
what their view looks like. See what
Absolutely.
they see. Right. And I know
Absolutely.
from your talk, I knew, and you mentioned, right, like the negative people that had been in your life, you can trace those moments to back, well, that's where it all started. That's where the
Yes.
anger started. That, and it's those moments that we need to go, and we need to be compassionate to the scared little boy, the scared little girl that is in all of us. And if
Right.
we can do that, and if we can hug that scared little person, then that's how the world changes. That's where we go from here.
Right. Right. Well, that's a very beautiful way of changing the world. I know for a fact that, just like they say that, I mean, hate cannot really change the world. Hate can only destroy the world. And the other day we were having a conversation. What you said is still there at the back of my mind when you said you cannot divide and multiply.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And again, is back to that Eckhart comment, act as if you have chosen this
Right.
moment.
Right.
I I firmly believe you cannot multiply by dividing. And I don't know where along our scientific journey of humanity we've
Right.
been so focused as a species to divide. We have been
Right.
so focused to divide, black versus white, male, female, Catholic, Protestant, right? Religion, ageism, sexism, everything is a division.
Right.
But there's that powerful interview that Morgan Freeman gave with 60 Minutes, probably about 15 years ago now, where the interview asked him, how do you get rid of racism?
Right.
And Morgan Freeman, without even thinking, said, stop talking about it.
True.
Stop, stop talking about it, right? We are, well, I don't want to use the word brainwash because we as a consumer are selecting the news outlets and the feeds that we follow. But it's
Right.
fascinating, in the year 2020, we have not heard about anything else happening in our world except COVID. So,
Right.
well, I guess it was earlier in COVID's days before the second wave when we had police
No-
officers shooting individuals, right? We did have that earlier in COVID when it wasn't
Right.
mainstream, but now that we're, vaccine and second wave. So is that to tell us that, no women have been abused, that no black teenagers have been shot by police officers? No, it's the media has purposely chosen not to tell us these things
Right.
because they're focused on another narrative.
Right.
So when one person, any person, not you, any person, can live a life of no division, that we are all one, We are created as one. We are created with this oneness, this source. Those who live that philosophy, they live a life of peace.
Right.
They live a life of joy. They live a life of harmony. But as long as we are focused on the things that divide us, we're never going to get to where we want to go.
True.
And this isn't just 2020. This is 5,000 years of human evolution. Our brains are biologically wired for fight or flight. We're
Mm.
wired. If we don't like something we see, to either run away from it or fight against it. That is what has allowed our species to evolve over millions of years. We're here because of that prehistoric brain. And it's
We've survived.
Elizabeth Gilbert, the author of Eat, Pray, Love. She says it best, right? Fear is really what is the energy associated with all that division.
Right.
Fear is allowed to be in the car. Fear is what has allowed us to survive. It's allowed to be in the car because without fear, we wouldn't be alive. But it's
Right.
not allowed to have its hands on the steering wheel. It's not allowed to change the station on the radio. It can have a nap in the back seat and come out when it's needed.
Right.
And when we have all these conversations again where people are yelling at each other, all I see is people who are hurting in their
Yes.
own victimness, they're stuck in their story. And rather than doing the deep work of themselves, they are going to attack others,
Right.
right? And the concepts of I don't know if you were at, I can't remember if you were there, the Archangel Summit last year. Elizabeth
I was
Gilbert
there.
spoke on that stage, and
Yes, I was there.
she spoke about toxic masculinity and toxic
Yes.
femininity,
Hmm.
because masculinity and femininity are one, right? There's a divine masculine and a divine feminine in all of us. We
Right.
all have it. And
Right.
it's when we can embrace that, again, that oneness that connects us, do we then start to go on a path of healing. But one of the
Right.
challenges, and it's really interesting, I had a conversation right before ours about this, is
Mm.
that so many individuals, male and female, they are scared
Hmm.
to put their views out in public
Right.
because of the cancel culture, the shame culture that we're living in with social media. And I can almost guarantee if Elizabeth Gilbert's talk about toxic masculinity and toxic femininity went out into the world, there would be trolls and haters and people jumping on everything she said. Because we live in this world as if I don't agree with you, I'm going to disagree with you and I'm going to delete you out of my life instead of having civil discourse about tell
Mm.
me why you think that way. What can I learn from you? What view, what perspective have I not seen myself that I need to understand deeper and better?
Right.
And all of this, I can see my bookshelf over there, and there's a book on it. Well, I've Socrates and I Plato, but Plato's Republic, he speaks about the philosopher kings, that one day the philosopher kings will rule the world. But the
Hmm.
philosopher kings, all they are the people who preach peace, love, inclusion, joy. And now that I'm on at this stage of my life, I just don't understand how difficult is it to love another human being?
Mm.
Why is that so hard? When we live in a world that makes fruit to go because apparently an apple or a banana is too complicated to eat, how can we not just accept love?
Hmm. Okay. I hear you. So, so here's a difficult question. How, okay, I want to make sure I frame it properly. Uh, so let's say, okay, I'm going to talk about my own example. After all that I went through with my partner, that I almost died, I had cancer, I was so stressed, and all of that. I made peace with all of that. And if let's say if I come from a place of love, I get what you're saying. You know, cancer was my journey of discovery. You know, where I gave up on, you know, holding on to, you know, what he did to me, and the anger and the resentment. And I realized that if I die, it ends. You know, what's the point of holding on to all this and taking it to my grave? And I ended there. But there, so, you know, we've had conversations in my family with my kids, and and I've been very clear on saying that I have no hate towards the men who hurt me. I made peace with that. And so there are times when my kids will ask me, "So do you still love him?" And I say yes, because I at one there was a time when I didn't, but now I've made peace with that. I have compassion for this person. uh, I've seen how what he's created for himself and the way he's being, and I really feel compassion, as you said, you know, about the killer who rode the van on the people on the sidewalk. And you said that when you went on stage and you said that, you know, I have love and compassion for the people who died and for the man who did this act. So pretty much like that, I come from that place. However, I've seen many a times that when I come from that space with my ex-husband, he does not respect that. He does not respect that. He will see that as, oh, she wants to come back. Oh, let's try this. Oh, can we try some intimacy? Can we go out together? We'll not be married anymore, but we could have this relationship on the side. That's where I feel violated. That's where I feel, okay, I'm coming from a place of higher love, understanding, compassion, but I am being misunderstood. That, okay, she's still in love with me. She's still, you know, the weak kind of love that I'm talking about, where, okay, you know, it's okay for me to treat her however I treated her. And there are many men who see that, like they see the kindness, the nurturing instinct, the loving, forgiving instinct of a woman as weakness. And not just him, there have been many a times, especially after my curry speech, the second speech that I talked about, love conquers all, where I'm talking about I made curry and I welcomed my husband. I've had a lot of men, you know, in the middle of the night sending me private messages, "Hey, gorgeous." And, you know, if I'm online for some reason, maybe I'm talking to my family in India, or for whatever reason I'm online, the attitude I get is, just because I'm single or just because I come through as loving and soft and gentle, so the men think I'm easy. The men think I'm available. What do you have to say about that?
What do I have to say to you or to society?
To
Because I think they're
both.
two very different things. So one
Like,
of the
I am
fast
frustrated. I am frustrated, and that's when I have my triggers come in. That, okay, look at these men. I mean, how many women are doing that? Maybe I'm biased, but, you know, maybe I don't know. And I in my entire lifetime, I haven't really seen stories of women abusing men. I know it happens, but it's relatively less in number, I feel, compared to men. And I may be wrong. Please forgive me. I'm not trying to dismiss the hurt a man is inflicted on by women, or I don't want to dismiss either men or women in this conversation. I'm curious and I'm wanting to know that why do men perceive a loving woman as a weak available woman, and like, let's manipulate, let's in fact, there was a 27-year-old kid, I mean, my daughter is 26 years old. He sent me a message saying, I want to go out with you and you're really hot and you're really this and that. And when I told him, you do you know that I have a daughter of your age? And he says, hey, you're not an empowered woman. That's great manipulation. Hey, you're not an empowered woman. Go look at Priyanka Chopra and her husband. Age is just a number and all of that. I don't have to show empowerment to you by going out with you. That's not my understanding of empowerment. I don't have to give in to what you're saying to establish I'm empowered. What do you have to say to me, and what do you have to say to all these men? I'm
So, using your example specifically,
yes,
my instant question,
yes.
if we were to be having a conversation, which we are, I would say, what do you still need to learn?
Okay.
If everyone is your teacher and
Right.
you are acting as if you have invited these messages in the middle of the night and this 27-year-old man or boy,
Okay.
you're not casting fault or blame.
Right.
You then take it to say, what is it I still need to learn?
Right.
And an element that, if I, as an outside observer, I
Mm-hmm.
would say one of the biggest lessons that seems to be screaming through these experiences is the concept of boundaries
Mm-hmm.
and releasing with love.
Right.
Because everyone is at a different level of consciousness. And
Right.
my license plate, I got my new license plate a couple months ago as my gift
Love
to
or
myself,
above.
love or above. And it is a researcher, he's dead, where he combined basically spirituality, consciousness, and physics, where he took every emotion is on
Mhm.
an energy level.
Right.
And it is natural, and I've said this for years, is that, like, say if you're a 5 on a scale of 1 to 10 energy,
Right.
people that are below you in
Mm-hmm.
energy are going to be attracted to you.
Right.
Because the people below you, they are your mirror. They are the people you learn from. They are
Right.
the people who are forcing you to sharpen your axe, sharpen your knife in order to get to the next level.
Right.
And you naturally are going to look up to people who are above you, right?
Right.
You're not going to look up to the people who are below you. And
Mm-hmm.
so this is the journey of a personal development coach, or a personal development coach who's actually worth anything. Because
Mm-hmm.
as a personal development coach is going through life, they're leveling up. It's like a video game. They're leveling up. And their tribe should be going up with them. And if
Right.
their tribe is not going up with them, then it's time to find a new tribe. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember the first time I ever heard Eckhart speak.
Right.
He opened up his talk and he basically said, half of you are here because you understand what I have to say. The other half of you probably are not going to understand anything I have to say, but that's okay. All you need to do is suffer more, and one day you'll understand. He told the people who were paying $100 or more in the audience that if you don't get what I'm saying, well,
You
you
need.
just have to go through more trials and tribulations, and one day you'll understand it.
Right.
And that leads back to a lot of things. So if you are attracting, and this is,
Mm-hmm.
as a single, as a white Caucasian male,
Right.
most of what I say in this realm is discounted because I'm
Right.
white and I'm male, right? Though you don't
Okay.
know anything about race, you don't know anything about sexism, right?
Mm-hmm.
Instantly, no matter what I say at this point forward, it's going to be discounted by the 95% of the population, and I get it. But every single spiritual text from time immemorial say the same thing. One of Jesus's in the Jesus story in the Bible, which has shaped Christianity, Father, forgive them not, for they do not know what they do.
Mm-hmm.
The people who killed him, even to his final moments, forgive them not, for they know not what they do.
Right.
And so in my journey, right, if you Google my name, you read found guilty of sexual assault. That's the headline. That's the story that sold papers.
Mm-hmm.
But I was never found guilty. I was never convicted. I never had a criminal record, but I can't
Right.
fight the paper. So I
Okay.
had to learn that there are going to be people who judge me. And it has nothing to do with me, it has everything to do with them.
Mm-hmm.
So the men in your life, is it up to you to change them? Or is it up to you to set boundaries
Mm-hmm.
around yourself
Mm-hmm.
and to say, this is what I will accept, this is not what I will accept. And
Right.
for every situation that I don't accept, I don't hate you. I'm not
Yes.
angry. I
Right.
don't I don't want to vilify you. I am going to release you with love. Because that is
Okay.
the element of being the victor and standing on your story, is
Right.
knowing that your story can no longer affect you. But
Right.
to understand that your story was just a moment in your time.
Right.
And I believe, I can't think of it. He was on Super Soul Sunday with Oprah a number of years ago. He speaks to soul levels. He speaks to that concept of reincarnation, right? That we are nothing but energy. And
Right.
energy, nothing can be created, nothing can be
Can be
destroyed.
destroyed.
It just changes forms. And
Right.
whatever you do not learn in this lifetime, you will have to
Will
learn
be.
it in the next time. And
Right.
you constantly are leveling up. And then when you reach that concept of whether it's nirvana or I heaven on earth,
Right.
and do I consider myself to be there? No, because I still have teachers that come into my life that I need to learn. But it's when
Mm-hmm.
I step back from 36,000 feet, I realize that every single element, even today, that comes into my life to teach me a lesson, it's always the same lesson. And I love, personally, I have many dialogues with the divine. I love getting tested. I love the divine putting something in my path and saying, all right, Kevin, have you learned the lesson yet?
Mm-hmm.
If you've learned the lesson, you're going to get through this challenge like that. If you don't learn the lesson, you're going to be back to square one. You're going to have to repeat
Right.
all of that. And I was in the financial world for 14 years, and the majority of my time was spent dealing with people after a death, after a divorce, or after a major disability. And
Mm-hmm.
what I found fascinating, especially in the divorce realm, is, and you experienced it in your own, right? You
Right.
left one relationship that was toxic, and
Right.
then you got into another one that was a
Right.
carbon copy. Well,
Right.
that's because you didn't learn the lesson the first time,
Right.
right? And I've been there. And all of those things that I've been through in my life, I remember the day that I was diagnosed with cancer because I
Mm-hmm.
looked up to God. The doctor said you have cancer, and in his room, in his doctor's office, I just looked up to the heavens and I said, I get it. I finally get it.
Get it.
From now on in, I am going to surrender to what is. I am not
Mm-hmm.
surrendering to other people. I am surrendering to what
To what
is.
is.
So when I have individuals attack me for my story, I don't react. I don't get into the gutter of anger and resentment with them. I stay here. I stay with myself. And I say, you know, usually I don't say it to them because they don't want to listen to what I have to say, but I'll release them with love. I'll be compassionate towards where they are because I have
Right.
no idea. You
Right.
know, if they're 35, 40 years old, I have no idea where they are. And
Mm.
I've been in the online dating world, so I've heard the stories of, this is what all men are like. But what's
Right.
fascinating to me is if they're trying it with you, they've tried it with others and they've been successful. Because if they weren't successful, they wouldn't be trying it again.
Mm-hmm.
And that's that oneness that we're all in. If we could teach little boys and little girls around the world to love self first, because a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people forget this, right? Is they say that,
Right.
well, the greatest in Christianity, the greatest commandment is love God and then love others as you love yourself. And that the second part is love others as you love yourself. So if you don't love yourself, you can't love
Mm-hmm.
others. If
Right.
you don't love yourself, you can't accept love from others. And everything is just teaching us to love. That's it.
Right.
Every single thing is teaching us to love.
Mm-hmm.
And
Okay.
COVID is like the first time ever where the globe, all 7 point whatever billion of us, are together. And we're here to learn one thing: to love ourselves first.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we do not love ourselves first, we can't do anything. And what do I see normally in our world? It's a lot of people who are broken and hurt and angry and bitter and filled with resentment, yelling at others to try and make them change. It's never
Mm.
going to work, ever.
I hear you. I hear you. So, with COVID times, and, we've been hearing about the numbers rising in terms of domestic violence, and, women and children particularly are impacted, and shelters are full, and, and things like that. How would you fit in the idea of love to heal and repair that scenario?
Sadly, until the world collectively suffers enough, we won't. And
Mhm.
that is, again, as I'm pulling in a number of things that I've said, is that we are a suffering species. I don't know for certain that we will come out of this. I
Right.
don't know. This might be the end of humanity. And it might not be a virus that takes us out, it would be ourselves. And so I think about, in our most recent history with the world wars,
Right.
how did we end up getting to a point where peace agreements were signed? People got sick and tired of fighting.
Mm. Right.
That's when things change, right? That is
Right.
the my father was in Alcoholics Anonymous for 40 years. And it's interesting because this is also part of my journey, the part of my journey before I was even born. The only
Right.
reason I'm alive is because my father, in a drunken rage, tried to kill my mother. Two and a
Mm-hmm.
half years before I was born, he sobered up, and then I'm the baby. So I get what you're talking about of your brother. That my sister is 15 years older than I am.
Right.
But he had suffered enough. Nobody made
Mm-hmm.
him change. He chose to change.
Change.
He chose that he was done. He was done suffering. He was done with the pain and the anger, and he sought help. I've never, I've never met anybody in my life. I've never read anybody in the books of history. I've never read or seen any movie or TV where someone changed because they were forced to, or that they were told how stupid they are, or told how dumb they are. Every single
Yes.
person who chooses to change does so on their own accord, and it's when they're sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, what do I say to the world? At what point are we done suffering? At what
Right.
point are we going to turn off the media? At what point are we going to say, Mr. or Mrs. Government Leader, you don't know what's best for my health. I'm going to trust my intuition and I'm going to make those decisions myself.
Mm-hmm.
We're not there yet, and I don't know if we ever will. Because, again, being in the financial world, I think about the great market collapse of 2008 that I lived through, that I was a financial planner in. We never learned the lesson. And until we learn the lesson, we're going to keep being put in these situations. And if we don't learn the lesson that we have systemic, societal, and cultural issues in 2020, we might get a vaccine for this thing, but we're going to be here again, and it's going to be bigger, and it's going to be quicker
Mm-hmm.
until we decide to stop suffering. And
Mm-hmm.
there's Ayn Rand wrote a book, Atlas Shrugged. I read it a
Yes.
number of years ago. It's a powerful book. It could be written about any topic at any time in the point of history. You can
Mm-hmm.
fight, you can fight, you can fight, but eventually, when you surrender, life gets a whole lot easier.
Right. So that's your perspective of how we can end violence.
It is. It's
Mm-hmm.
exactly opposite of what culture tells us.
Mm-hmm.
But when we surrender to what is
Mm-hmm.
and accept or and choose that we
Mm-hmm.
do not want to suffer anymore,
Right.
we may not end it beside us, but we'll definitely end it in ourselves.
Right. Thank you so much. Thank you for your beautiful perspective of how we could end violence against women or violence against any human being for that matter. And and I definitely agree with your idea of coming from a place of love, harmony, and understanding, and listening for those things, and not seeing the other person as you know, um, whether it is the predator or whether it is someone who's abusing you, not seeing them as men or women, but just seeing them as human beings, and and not hating them for being human beings, but definitely not agreeing, or definitely standing up against what they're doing, the act of it. The act of it is what we need to stand up against, but not the person himself or herself. So having said that, I really appreciate your time. I appreciate all the beautiful thoughts that you shared. And thank you, thank you, thank you. If there's anyone who has any questions, please write your questions or comments uh, below in the comment section. And thank you to all the people who listened. I will be back again tomorrow with another person to interview. Thank you once again, Kevin, and we'll see everyone again tomorrow. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you.